the spark of curiosity. In the heart of 13th century England, where the shadows of medieval castles loomed over the land and the tolling of church bells echoed through the air, a child was born in the quiet town of Ilchester. His name was Roger, and although the world would not yet know it, he was destined to become a figure who would change the way humanity thought about the universe itself. Roger was the son of a modest family, likely with enough wealth to afford him a proper education, but nothing to suggest he would rise beyond the ordinary. Yet, from an early age, there was something different about him. His curiosity burned fiercely, even as a boy, like an ember that could not be extinguished. While other children played in the fields, chasing sheep or picking berries, Roger found his joy in books, in learning about the world through the ancient wisdom of philosophers and scholars. It was not enough for him to simply memorize the teachings of the church or the scholars of the day. He wanted to understand the why behind every answer. Oxford was where he first encountered the intellectual ferment that would shape his future. The University of Oxford, at that time, was a place of bustling scholarly activity, a site where the great minds of Europe gathered to debate philosophy, theology, and the natural world. This was the cradle of scholasticism, a method of thought that sought to reconcile reason with faith, to prove religious truths through the logic of the ancient philosophers, most notably Aristotle. For many, learning was about repeating the established wisdom of the ancient authorities, but Roger's mind was not content to accept things on face value. What if these ancient texts are not the final word, he thought. What if there is more to know, if we can learn to see the world for ourselves? It was in these early years that Roger began to question the limitations of scholasticism. He was learning, but he was also observing, watching the world around him, and thinking critically about the nature of truth. He started to realize that the natural world, the stars, the trees, the rivers, the very air we breathe, was itself a vast library, full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. To understand the world, he concluded, one must not only read the texts of the ancients but look at the world with a discerning eye. If the universe was created by a divine hand, then surely the patterns of nature were themselves a form of language, a code waiting to be deciphered. Roger's early days in Oxford were filled with late-night readings by candlelight, discussions with fellow students, and the kind of intellectual fervor that often accompanies a young mind on the brink of discovering something revolutionary. But there was also frustration. The ideas he was developing, based on first-hand observation and logic, seemed at odds with the rigid teachings of the Church, which placed divine authority above all other sources of knowledge. And yet, Roger persisted. He had a growing belief that the truths he sought were not merely intellectual games to be played in the cloistered halls of academia, but divine mysteries to be uncovered. His heart, like his mind, was set ablaze. He knew that something profound was waiting to be discovered, but to unlock it, he would need more than just logic. He would need to see the world with new eyes. Part 2: The Wisdom of the Earth. By the time Roger Bacon left England for Paris in the mid-13th century, his intellectual ideas had begun to crystallize, though they were still in their early stages. Paris, at that time, was one of the great centers of learning in Europe. The University of Paris was the intellectual capital of Christendom, and the debates between scholars were fierce and often contentious. Here, Roger was exposed not only to the work of Aristotle but also to the vibrant intellectual currents flowing through the Arab world. In particular, he encountered the works of the Arab philosopher and scientist, Avicenna, whose writings on medicine and philosophy would deeply influence Roger's thinking. Yet, for all the wealth of knowledge in Paris, Roger felt constrained by the rigid structures of medieval learning. It was in Paris that he first encountered a deep tension between the ancient teachings and the discoveries he was beginning to suspect lay beyond them. The university, steeped in Aristotle and Christian doctrine, held that the world could only be understood through the lens of ancient texts, mediated through the teachings of the Church. But Roger was beginning to see that true understanding could not be achieved merely by analyzing old books, no matter how wise the authors. Rather than accepting established ideas on faith, Roger began to develop his own method of inquiry, a process of testing hypotheses against the physical world. What if the way to understand the cosmos was not to memorize the writings of ancient authorities, but to observe, measure, and experiment? His revolutionary approach was rooted in the idea of empiricism, the belief that knowledge comes from sensory experience, from seeing, hearing, touching, and experimenting. In a time when logic and theology ruled supreme, Roger's insistence on direct observation and experimentation was radical. He believed that a person could not claim to understand nature without first seeing it, testing it, and measuring it. The world itself was an experiment waiting to happen. For Roger, science was not a solitary intellectual pursuit, it was an active and transformative experience. He wanted to understand how the stars moved in the night sky, how light bent when it passed through different substances, how the human eye saw. He believed that the secrets of the universe were there, hidden in plain sight, and that human beings could uncover them if they simply learned to look more carefully. In his work on optics, for example, Roger conducted detailed studies on the way light interacted with different materials, developing theories that would later be foundational to the field. His fascination with light wasn't just academic, it was deeply spiritual. To understand light was to understand the divine spark that permeated all of creation. To Roger, the natural world was a reflection of God's mind, and by studying it, one could gain deeper insight into the mysteries of the divine. Part 3: The Book of Secrets. It was during his time in Paris that Roger wrote his most important work, Opus Majus, the Greater Work, a massive treatise that covered a vast range of topics, from philosophy to alchemy, from optics to the study of languages. In this book, Roger laid out his groundbreaking ideas, not only on the nature of knowledge but on how knowledge should be pursued. In the Opus Majus, Roger introduced the world to his vision of a new kind of scholarship, one that integrated empirical observation, logic, and experimentation. For Roger, the study of nature was not a mere intellectual exercise, it was a spiritual calling. Science, in his view, was not a challenge to faith but a way to understand the divine order of the universe. But the book was more than just a manifesto for science, it was a call for a new method of learning. Roger argued that scholars should not simply rely on the authority of ancient texts or established dogma. Instead, they should approach the world with open eyes and a questioning mind. They should seek knowledge through observation and experiment, through the testing of ideas against the real world. He also outlined a vision of a more holistic education, one that included not only philosophy and theology but also mathematics, linguistics, and the study of the natural world. He believed that mathematics, in particular, was the key to understanding the fundamental laws of nature. Through numbers and patterns, one could uncover the hidden order of the cosmos. But while Roger's intellectual brilliance was undeniable, he faced a major obstacle: the Church. The medieval Church held immense power over intellectual life, and anything that challenged its teachings was often met with suspicion. Roger's call for empirical science and his interest in alchemy, considered by many to be the work of the devil, made him a controversial figure. In the eyes of the Church, his ideas were seen as a challenge to divine authority. Part 4: The Struggles of a Seeker. Despite his groundbreaking work, Roger Bacon's life was marked by struggles. His advocacy for a new kind of learning, grounded in observation and experiment, was met with resistance from both the religious and academic authorities. His call for a more open-minded approach to knowledge was viewed with suspicion, and his alchemical interests only fueled the rumors about his potential heresy. He was summoned before the church on multiple occasions to defend his ideas. In some ways, Roger's life became a battle between his unyielding commitment to knowledge and the entrenched religious institutions that governed intellectual life. The church had long been a powerful force in shaping knowledge and truth, and anything that did not align with its teachings was dangerous. Roger's desire to break free from this control made him a target. Yet, he remained unbowed, convinced that the pursuit of knowledge was a divine mission. "The study of nature is not a threat to divine wisdom," he wrote to Pope Clement IV, "but a way to understand it more fully." But for all his struggles, Roger never saw the full realization of his ideas. His life was one of intellectual isolation. Though he made significant contributions to the fields of optics, alchemy, and mathematics, his ideas were largely dismissed during his lifetime. The intellectual revolution he had hoped for would not come in his day. Part 5: The Flame of Knowledge. Roger Bacon's name may have been largely forgotten by his contemporaries, but his legacy endured, long after his death in 1292. The ideas he championed, of empirical observation, experimentation, and a holistic understanding of the universe, would eventually form the foundation of the scientific revolution that would sweep Europe in the centuries that followed. It was not until the work of figures like Galileo, Copernicus, and Newton in the Renaissance and early modern period that Roger's vision of a more scientific approach to knowledge would be fully realized. The scientific method, which emphasizes observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and analysis, would become the cornerstone of modern science, all thanks to the pioneering efforts of Roger Bacon. Roger's impact was not immediate, but it was profound. The light of his knowledge, though dim in his own time, eventually illuminated the path for future generations. And when we peer through a microscope or telescope today, when we investigate the natural world, we are still following in the footsteps of Roger Bacon, the alchemist of knowledge, the man who dared to look beyond the words of ancient texts and into the heart of nature itself. His legacy is a testament to the power of curiosity, the enduring strength of the human intellect, and the belief that the pursuit of knowledge is not just an intellectual endeavor, but a deeply human one, rooted in our quest to understand both the world and the divine. Conclusion: the eternal flame of inquiry. Roger Bacon's life was one of unrelenting curiosity, boundless intellect, and a deep commitment to understanding the natural world. Though his ideas were revolutionary, they were also ahead of their time, and much of his work was obscured by the academic and religious structures of his era. Yet, in the centuries following his death, the seeds that Roger had planted began to grow, slowly but surely, transforming the intellectual landscape of Europe and ultimately the world. What makes Roger Bacon truly remarkable is not just the scope of his contributions but the very essence of his intellectual spirit. He did not view science as a mere tool for technical or pragmatic progress. He saw it as a way to understand the deeper, divine order of the universe. His belief that knowledge, whether gained through philosophy, mathematics, or natural observation, could illuminate both the material and the spiritual world was a profound one. For Bacon, the pursuit of knowledge was an act of reverence, a journey toward understanding the mind of God, whose fingerprints were imprinted upon the natural world. His insistence on empirical observation, experimentation, and the integration of various disciplines laid the groundwork for the modern scientific method. Though Roger's name was sometimes lost in the annals of history, his vision eventually became the foundation for the scientific revolution that would change the course of human history. Figures like Galileo, Copernicus, and Newton, whose work would directly challenge and expand upon the very ideas Bacon had begun to formulate, stand as the intellectual descendants of Roger's pioneering insights. But perhaps the greatest lesson Roger Bacon left to us is the importance of wonder in our quest for knowledge. Roger was not merely a scholar or a scientist, he was, in many ways, an alchemist of the mind. His thirst for understanding the natural world was not driven by an ambition for fame or personal glory, but by a deep-seated wonder at the mysteries of existence. He looked at the stars, the earth, the animals, and the plants not simply as objects of study, but as expressions of a greater truth that could be known, understood, and, in some sense, loved. In this sense, Roger Bacon's journey was not only one of intellectual discovery but a deeply human one. It was a journey that questioned old assumptions, challenged entrenched authorities, and sought to reconcile reason with faith, science with spirituality. It was a journey that reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is never a mere intellectual exercise but a search for deeper meaning and connection, to the world, to each other, and to the divine. Today, as we continue to explore the frontiers of science and knowledge, whether in the realms of astronomy, physics, medicine, or artificial intelligence, Bacon's legacy lives on. His work has become woven into the very fabric of modern science, and his belief that the world is full of hidden truths waiting to be discovered continues to inspire new generations of thinkers, scholars, and explorers. Roger Bacon's life serves as a reminder that true learning begins with a willingness to question, to explore, and to see the world not just as it is but as it could be. His work shows that intellectual courage, the courage to pursue knowledge without fear of where it might lead, is one of the highest forms of human endeavor. It is this spirit of inquiry, this undying flame of curiosity, that drives humanity forward, toward new discoveries, new understandings, and perhaps, new ways of seeing the world and ourselves. In the end, Roger Bacon's greatest contribution was not just the body of work he left behind, but the example he set for us all, that to seek the truth is a noble and divine pursuit, one that demands both heart and mind, and one that will forever be worth the journey.